They laughed when Jasmine Crockett called Michelle Obama outdated. The studio lit up with smirks. One commentator whispered, "She's not built for this era." Even the moderator let the jab slide, eyes flicking toward the ratings monitor. But Michelle didn't flinch. She waited, let the moment stretch, and when the cameras rolled again, she opened a worn leather folder, not rushed, not theatrical, just final. Inside, leaked memos, burner phone transcripts, and a timeline linking Crockett's biggest donor to the same PAC that once tried to discredit Michelle's own education initiatives. Jasmine blinked hard. "That's not—" Michelle cut her off with a single look, one that said, "You started this. You weren't ready." The silence that followed? National. A boom mic creaked. Someone off stage swore. Jasmine glanced to her team. No help, no rebuttal. The folder didn't just expose, it ended. And just like that, the next generation found out who built the ground they stood on. Before diving into this extraordinary exchange, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful political moments that the mainstream media won't show you. To understand the significance of this confrontation, Jasmine Crockett had the crowd locked in. The stage lights gleamed off her blazer's gold trim, her curls immaculate, her smile weaponized, half charm, half dare. She spoke with cadence, precision, and just enough fire to make people lean in without flinching. One hand stayed animated, slicing through the air with practiced boldness, while the other gripped the podium like it belonged to her and always had. At just 39, she was the future, or at least that's how the audience saw it tonight. She wasn't here to pay tribute. She was here to inherit. "This generation," she was saying between bursts of laughter from the room, "we don't need permission to lead. We are the moment, and we're not waiting to be anointed." Raucous applause. She laughed with them, leaned in like she was letting the nation in on a secret. "I mean, come on, grace is cute, but it won't get you through a broken polling machine in Mississippi, or explain why half the folks under 30 don't trust the system you built." The "you" hung heavy. Everyone knew who sat across from her, silent and watching. The camera panned. Michelle Obama. Stillness incarnate, not icy, not dismissive, just quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't need to compete for attention because it already owned the weight of the room. Her hands were folded in her lap, eyes steady. A presence that felt more like marble than flesh. Not cold, but carved from something permanent. She hadn't spoken once. The debate had gone on for 18 minutes. Jasmine had delivered 4 perfectly calculated jabs, 2 generational grenades, and a soaring defense of real-time revolution that made even the moderator nod along. Michelle had blinked twice, and Jasmine wasn't afraid of her. That was the danger. She respected the former First Lady, sure, but reverence wasn't part of her campaign. Jasmine wasn't the girl raised on bedtime stories of when they go low. She was the one who asked, "And if they stay low, do we stay broke?" The audience laughed again. One woman clapped so hard her phone tumbled from her lap. Jasmine pressed in. "The truth is, we're done asking. We're done waiting. And we're definitely done tiptoeing around the legacy of people who didn't do enough fast enough." A gasp. The soft kind, like a fabric tearing. Michelle didn't flinch. Jasmine smiled. Not cruelly, not triumphantly, just knowingly, like someone crossing the finish line with a full breath left. She turned toward Michelle, the camera swinging to catch her in 3/4 profile, the classic, next-gen confronts icon shot producers dream about. And then Michelle moved. Barely. She sat up, just slightly straighter, shifted her hands from her lap to the desk, touched the edge of a single note card, and Jasmine froze. Not visibly, not enough for anyone to call it panic, but the rhythm slipped. The room caught it. Something unnameable wobbled in the air as if a ceiling tile had loosened overhead. Michelle looked at her, not with challenge, not even with disappointment, just memory. It wasn't pity. It wasn't pride. It was the gaze of someone who had outlived too many moments like this to be impressed by another. Michelle leaned toward the mic. No throat clear, no wind-up, just a single breath. "I know fire." Silence. Not stunned silence, threatened silence. The moderator looked up, startled. His cue cards shook slightly as he adjusted his glasses. One of the producers in the tech pit turned to another and mouthed, "Cut to wide?" No one moved. Michelle wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't arguing. She wasn't even speaking to Jasmine, not directly. She was speaking to the echo chamber that had just crowned a new queen before the former one had stood up. "You don't debate history," she said calmly. "You either carry it or erase it." Nothing. No clap, no reaction. Just stillness. And suddenly the show felt wrong. This wasn't a passing of the torch. This wasn't a torch at all. It was an open flame. People in the audience shifted in their seats, as if remembering something they didn't know they had forgotten. Phones lowered. Laughter dried. Michelle hadn't raised her voice, but she had changed the room. Jasmine stood at the podium, still poised, still glowing, but the moment was gone. Not because Michelle had taken it, because she had reminded them who built the stage. And now, nothing could continue as it had before. The lights stayed on, but everything felt over. It began with theater. A stage soaked in patriotic blue, flag backdrops stitched tight against scaffolding, and a floor polished so clean it reflected every flash of $1 million smile. The town hall wasn't born of civic duty. It was a production, sold in segments and sponsored by anxiety. The network executives wanted blood. The ratings had slumped since the last national outburst, and they needed something primal. 2 generations of power colliding under hot lights. Jasmine Crockett was their answer. 39, brash, unapologetic. She didn't come from pedigree. She came from protest. She knew how to weaponize a microphone, how to smile while she sliced, how to burn without even raising her voice. They called her the new truth, not because she told it, but because she embodied it. Urgent, loud, confrontational. She walked on stage like she owned the room, wrapped in highlighter orange silk and defiance. Her team had workshopped every phrase, rehearsed the lean-ins, the sharp turns, the pause for applause beats. Her heels clicked like punctuation across the riser. Michelle Obama followed with no introduction, no crescendo. The applause came, of course, but it felt obligatory. She wasn't new. She was the archive. Revered, yes. Feared, maybe. But for tonight, they didn't want reverence. They wanted spectacle. Michelle wore gray, flat, quiet gray. Not somber, not dramatic, just present. Like she hadn't come to perform, only to endure. In the wings, the floor manager whispered into her headset, annoyed that Michelle wouldn't allow last-minute makeup retouches. In the production truck, a junior editor had already preloaded generational clash lower thirds, and Jasmine struck first, not cruelly, but publicly. "I don't want to tear anyone down," she said, smiling at the audience, "but we can't keep mistaking grace for change. This moment doesn't need a symbol. It needs a sword." Roar. Michelle didn't blink. She sat still, fingers resting lightly on a stack of index cards she wouldn't use. Jasmine tilted her head toward the crowd, relishing it. "We've had 8 years of speeches. We need action now. Real power. Real fight. And if the past can't keep up, a pause for timing. It can step aside." The moderator gave a tight smile, already calculating how many clips would go viral by morning. The audience clapped. One man in the front row stood. Michelle said nothing. She waited. The lights overhead flickered, the heat of the rig starting to sweat onto bare foreheads. A production assistant adjusted her earpiece and cursed under her breath about a static hum that wouldn't clear. Michelle didn't reach for her cue cards. She just looked at Jasmine. Not with anger, not even curiosity, with gravity. Then she spoke. "You're not debating me," she said. Pause. "You're debating your own reflection." Silence again. The kind that isn't confused, just unnerved. Jasmine didn't respond right away. She wasn't thrown, not yet, but something cracked, because the line didn't feel rehearsed. It didn't aim for applause. It aimed for the fault line between ambition and memory. And suddenly the crowd wasn't sure what it had come to see. Blood was easy. Truth was harder. Jasmine wasn't rattled yet. She adjusted, recalibrated. One line didn't land? Fine. She had 10 more in the chamber. The show wasn't over. It had barely begun. The audience wanted blood, and she knew how to give it with a grin. She turned her body slightly, letting the cameras catch the angle of mockery just right. Her hand came up like a punctuation mark before the next strike. "You know, Mrs. Obama," she said, dragging the title with a polished edge, "some of us didn't have the luxury of legacy. We didn't get a Netflix deal, a book tour, Secret Service, or a mansion before we turned 35. We had to build ourselves from nothing." The audience howled, clapped, leaned forward like this was comedy, not combat. Jasmine smiled briefly. She had meant it as a jab, yes, but also a thesis. She had built herself. From traffic court to congressional spotlight, from local stations to this national platform. She hadn't been given the podium. She had kicked down the door. Michelle still didn't flinch. She looked toward the moderator, who was now gesturing for balance, clearly ready to pivot to a commercial break, or at least cut the tension with an off-topic question. But Michelle didn't yield. She didn't even blink toward him. She just shifted her weight, leaned forward slightly, and breathed once before speaking. "When you say you built yourself," she said, quiet as a wound, "who laid the road?" The room stilled. Michelle didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words cut with the weight of breath held too long. "Who kept the streetlights on while you studied at night? Who scrubbed offices so you could focus on bar exams? Who stitched your first suit? Who signed the first loan? Who taught you how to hold your chin up when they called you angry just for existing?" The crowd wasn't clapping anymore. Someone shifted uncomfortably. One of the camera operators looked away from the monitor to glance at the stage with naked unease. Michelle continued, "Don't mistake silence for absence. Don't mistake surviving for self-made. If I stood on a stage and told America I built myself from nothing, my mother would laugh herself hoarse. Because she knows how many doors she broke her hands on, just to leave one cracked open for me." Flashback. Years ago, Michelle pressed against a metal barricade, 12 years old, watching her mother raise her voice at a city hall meeting. A white alderman had told her it wasn't her place to comment on zoning laws. She'd spoken anyway. She'd been escorted out. Michelle had remembered the red in her mother's cheeks, the burn of humiliation mixed with unbent pride. "I've been in rooms where they ignored me until I brought my husband," Michelle said. "I've been told I was too angry, too black, too much. And I still showed up. I don't say that to impress you. I say it because you are not the first to claw your way in. And you won't be the last. But don't you dare spit on the staircase while your shoes are still wet from the climb." The moderator half rose from his chair. "Mrs. Obama?" She didn't stop. She didn't acknowledge him. Her eyes remained locked on Jasmine. And somewhere in the audience, the shift finally broke. A young woman near the second row who had cheered at Jasmine's last zinger now sat with her hand pressed over her mouth, tears spilling without sound. No sobbing. Just a slow, unbearable recognition. It wasn't supposed to land like this. Michelle didn't reach for her notes. She didn't shuffle through stats or pivot to applause lines. Her hand moved calmly, deliberately, toward the manila folder tucked beside her water glass. It wasn't marked confidential. No red stamps, no watermark. It had been hiding in plain sight for the entire event, like so many truths we pretend not to see until someone forces us to look. She opened it with the grace of someone not unveiling evidence but memory. The room leaned in. She pulled out a letter. One page. Creased. The ink slightly faded. There was something mournful about the way she held it, like it deserved gentleness. "This," Michelle said, her voice steady but low, "was written 2 years ago, never published, never leaked. It wasn't meant to shame or uplift. It was meant to ask." But no one answered. The moderator hesitated. He'd been warned about surprises, and this smelled like one. Jasmine shifted in her chair, trying to recalibrate what was about to unfold. Her smile had tightened, not vanished, not yet, but it no longer touched her eyes. Michelle began reading. "I remember when you used to sit on the floor of my office, asking how to get the right words into the press without losing the heart of the issue. I told you, don't sell the truth, center it. Don't perform the wound, tend it. You swore you wouldn't forget us." Jasmine's lips parted. Her eyebrows drew inward. Not quite in confusion, in recognition. Michelle continued. "But the moment you got the microphone, something changed. You started speaking for us, not with us. And then you stopped speaking to us at all. You forgot us the minute the lights hit your name." The words echoed. The crowd was no longer a crowd. It was a jury, unsure how it had ended up in a courtroom. Michelle lowered the letter, not for effect, but as if it were heavy. "It was written by Marcus Lynn. He died 6 months ago. Heart failure. He didn't want this aired on national television, but I watched his last interview. He still believed in you, even after." Jasmine opened her mouth, but nothing came. Then, "That's not fair. He didn't know." Michelle raised one hand, not in protest, in mourning. "He knew you better than you know yourself. That's why it hurts." The audience was no longer applauding anyone. Phones were out, not to cheer but to document. Hashtags appeared on screen behind the live stream. "Letter from Marcus, forgotten by fame, who we remember." The silence deepened, thickened, until it began to hum. Jasmine didn't shout, didn't deflect. She looked like someone staring at a photo they hadn't expected to see again. Her jaw tensed, her hands clenched beneath the table. But her shoulders had dropped. Her fire had dulled, not extinguished, but buried beneath a flood of memory and implication. Michelle didn't gloat. She didn't lean in. She simply folded the letter again and placed it back in the folder. Sometimes it's not the scream that ends a performance. It's the pause that follows. The folder clicked shut with a sound no microphone picked up, But every soul in the room heard it. A quiet seal, a symbolic burial. Michelle didn't smile. She didn't look for affirmation. She looked up like she'd just walked through a fire and stepped into air again, scorched, intact, unwilling to pretend it hadn't happened. The moderator, visibly rattled, cleared his throat. Something in his posture had shifted, shoulders more hunched, eyes darting to the control booth. He was the kind of man trained to keep the peace, to press ahead even when the ground trembled. But tonight, the script was already ash. He leaned slightly forward, voice taut. "Mrs. Obama, would you care to respond to Representative Crockett's earlier point about political relevance?" Michelle didn't blink, didn't breathe deep. She just spoke. "I don't chase relevance," she said. "I carry memory." That was it. No crescendo, no monologue. Just a sentence that sliced through the air like a scalpel through silk. The audience didn't cheer. They froze. It was a rupture, a realization. The kind of moment people don't clap through because they're too busy trying to process what just happened. Someone in the second row gasped audibly. Not theatric. Human. Jasmine moved, but only barely. Her shoulders jerked forward like she might lean into her mic, but her body betrayed the stutter. Her mouth opened too fast. Her words arrived too late. "I didn't come here to erase anyone," she said, voice faltering at the edges. "I came to stand in—" But her rhythm was gone. The cadence that had lit up the first half of the night now felt theatrical, desperate. Her voice echoed against a silence no longer receptive. The crowd that once laughed with her now studied her, not hostile, not cruel, just waiting. Behind her, her makeup team was panicking. One woman mouthed something from behind a curtain. "Powder? Reapply?" But Jasmine didn't move. A production assistant whispered furiously into a headset, hands fluttering like anxious birds. The red light on camera 3 flickered. Was it still live? Was it delay buffered? Michelle didn't look at the screens. She looked at Jasmine. And then she said, with no venom, no victory, just clarity, "You wanted a moment. I wanted a memory." There it was. The line that would be looped, dissected, turned into think pieces, podcast openers, commencement quotes, campaign ads, and late-night satire. The line that would be slowed down in reels, captioned in serif font over grayscale close-ups, whispered on TikTok over piano scores, written in chalk outside schools. The audience didn't know whether to breathe or bow. Jasmine sat still. Her eyes didn't water, but they did widen, as if she saw in real time what it meant to lose without being destroyed. To be outlived, not just outwitted. To watch someone lay down history like a hand of cards you didn't know were in the deck. Michelle didn't lean back. She didn't touch her water. She just waited for the rest of the world to catch up. Long before the lights bathed her in applause, Jasmine had been carving out her warpath. In the weeks leading up to the forum, her campaign office had become a war room. Corkboards littered with opposition notes, producers' bios, trending soundbites, every angle calculated for conquest. She wasn't planning a debate. She was scripting a coronation. The pitch was clear. A generational turnover, live streamed for the country to witness. "Make her look like yesterday," one strategist had said, tapping a folder labeled "Legacy Fatigue." Jasmine laughed. She always laughed before a kill. Her closest advisor, a former civil rights professor turned consultant, had pulled her aside 2 days before the event, voice low, eyes weathered. "You're too eager to swing," he warned. "This isn't about the fight. It's about the flame you leave behind." Jasmine rolled her eyes. "That's the problem with y'all," she replied. "Too many embers, not enough wildfires." The morning of the town hall, Michelle sat alone in a green room that felt less like a waiting area and more like a confessional. No entourage, no prep team, just the hum of event and the folded letter in her hands, edges softened from rereading. The paper wasn't sacred, but it carried a weight scripture couldn't match. The writing, familiar, trembling, belonged to someone Jasmine once quoted as a hero, someone now gone, someone who'd seen the warning signs in Jasmine early, but still believed in her until it broke them. The betrayal wasn't one-directional. Michelle knew that, knew how the press had courted Jasmine as a counter-image to her, knew the networks framed her silence as stagnation, her dignity as disengagement. They used Jasmine's fury to dim Michelle's memory. And Jasmine knew they used Michelle's myth to cage her future. They were both used. That's what made it so intimate. Backstage after the segment, the air was soaked in adrenaline and raw nerves. Jasmine had made it to the makeup chair before the tears came. She covered her face with her sleeve, but the shaking couldn't be hidden. Someone filmed it, an intern maybe, or a producer with too much ambition. The footage leaked before the credits finished rolling. No cruelty in it. Just a woman unraveling quietly, mouthing a single word. Why? Michelle didn't gloat. When the segment ended, applause absent, credits crawling over static, she didn't unclip her mic, didn't stand, didn't blink. She stared directly into the lens as the feed faded. She didn't leave. It wasn't over. Not for her. Not for Jasmine. Not for the audience, who suddenly realized they hadn't watched a town hall. They'd witnessed a haunting. And ghosts don't end when the cameras cut. The country didn't react. It fractured. In the hours after the debate aired, the internet split into flame wars and funeral hymns. On one side, slick clips clipped into TikTok crescendos, hashtags like Crockett clap back and sub boomer begone trending with choreographed edits, soundtracked by pop beats and sound bites, stripped of context and weaponized by speed. On the other side, long-form essays, aching posts, black and white montages narrated in whispers, elders writing open letters to daughters, teachers replaying the full broadcast in class and letting the silence teach. Something had broken, but what broke depended on what you were ready to see. Michelle gave no interviews, ignored every offer, every anchor's request, every brand reaching out for partnership. She didn't tweet. She didn't write a follow-up op-ed. She let the footage hang like smoke in a closed room. She understood something about the tempo of grief, how silence could be louder than any quote. She didn't need to explain what already rang. Somewhere far from the noise, in a moment unscripted by any team, she sat in a dim living room, the kind with wood-paneled walls and furniture that remembered family names. On the screen, the network replayed the debate in full, pausing for ad breaks every 7 minutes. Michelle muted it. She remembered it already. Instead, she watched herself watching Jasmine, years earlier, back when Jasmine was first breaking onto the floor of the house. A clip from C-SPAN, grainy and gray-lit, Jasmine's voice thundering through a nearly empty chamber. Michelle had paused mid-pour of coffee. "She's got it," she'd whispered. Not envy, not fear, just recognition, the way one torch sees another. Later, she would admit to a friend, "I didn't want to stop her. I wanted her to know what she was carrying." No one ever told you how heavy it was until it collapsed on your ribs. Back at the studio, long after the audience had cleared, the janitor noticed them first. Michelle's shoes, polished, dark suede heels, left precisely at center stage, untouched, like a relic. No one dared move them. For the rest of the week, studio tours paused at that spot. Producers avoided stepping near them. Cameramen shot around them like they were graves. Jasmine's team stopped speaking. The war room fell into that awkward silence reserved for the moment after a car crash. No alarms, just breathing. No one asked for edits. No one strategized spin. Jasmine sat alone at the long conference table, the lights dimmed to avoid headaches. She held the letter again, not in anger, not for evidence, just for proof she hadn't imagined it all. Her fingers didn't shake this time. She read each word like scripture. But this gospel wasn't written for the saved. It was written for the ones who forgot who watched them walk on water. The silence didn't mean nothing was happening. It meant everything was. Cable anchors paused before naming Jasmine Crockett the voice of the next generation. Headlines that once read like coronations now hedged. Firebrand or fallout, the Crockett conundrum, when history hits back. Media outlets that had once begged for her takes now played Michelle's moment on loop instead. The folder, the letter, the camera's slow pan across her stillness, her voice surgical in its restraint. The moment didn't fade. It spread, like light in a cathedral, like a bruise in motion. Michelle finally broke her silence, but not on television, not with a memoir chapter or a TED Talk, just a black square posted at midnight with 2 lines written in white sans serif. Legacy isn't won in a moment, it's earned in the dark. M.O. The movement Jasmine had once sparked suddenly belonged to someone else. And then it happened. One of Jasmine's most visible supporters, a fellow congresswoman, just a few years her senior, who'd once introduced her as the future of black leadership, went on MSNBC and when asked about the debate hesitated, just long enough to say everything. Then she leaned forward, hands folded, eyes calm. "I love Jasmine, I still do. But that night?" Michelle reminded us that clarity and conviction aren't the same thing. It was a clean defection. No attack, no endorsement, just a line in the sand. Jasmine watched it alone, in her apartment, no entourage this time. She didn't call anyone, just turned the screen black and stared at her reflection, not with anger, but with something worse, recognition. The stage was empty now. 2 chairs remained beneath the heatless buzz of production lights. One had been pushed slightly back, the cushion indented, the microphone left crooked. The other, Michelle's, sat undisturbed, except for the letter, still resting there. Not clenched, not hidden, just left behind like a name someone didn't need to say twice. The audience had long since filtered out. No more clapping, no more live tweets, no more gasps turned gifs, just the stage and the memory of what detonated there. Jasmine had vanished the moment the segment cut to commercial. Her earpiece torn out, heels echoing as she crossed behind the set. No press pit, no statement, just absence. Michelle didn't chase, didn't pose. She stood, took a breath that didn't need witnesses, and walked straight down the stairs without acknowledging a single camera. No wave, no smirk, just departure, clean, complete. The technicians lingered, whispering. One of them reached toward the letter but stopped, as if touching it would burn. Another assistant muted the monitors. There was nothing left to amplify. The damage had already landed, not with volume but with precision. Up in the booth, the director leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on the final wide shot. Michelle's chair still angled perfectly toward the audience, the letter catching the overhead light like scripture. The whole thing framed like the last page of a history book nobody expected to be written tonight. Outside, the air was thicker. Some protesters, unsure whether to chant or not, drifted in their signs. Cameramen packed up quietly. Nobody knew what came next, but inside that studio, one truth remained. The debate was over. Not lost, not won, wrecked. And as the broadcast cut to an insurance commercial, the final camera zoomed slowly, deliberately out, turning legacy into silhouette. They'll clip it, meme it, twist it, but they can't forget it.